Welcome, everyone. My name is Audrey Kitagawa. I'm the president and founder of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. We are pleased to bring you this film, which highlights the work of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, co-founded by Hugh Locke, a member of the Academy's International Advisory Council. The Smallholder Farmers Alliance is an innovative social enterprise model which is helping to reforest, renew, and feed Haiti by establishing farmer cooperatives, building agricultural export markets, creating farm business, and contributing to community development. The other co-founder of this alliance is Timote Georges. Together, Hugh and Timote jointly envision a reforested and renewed landscape for Haiti and created a way to engage local smallholder farmers in their initiative. This concept, called tree currency, provides farmers with seeds, tools, and agricultural training to increase their farm yields in exchange for planting trees. The program supports smallholder farm families and gives equal engagement to husbands and wives. There are more than 2.5 billion smallholder farmers in developing countries around the world. That is 1/3 of the world's population. The concepts developed in Haiti can be adapted and introduced to other developing countries with the potential to significantly increase food security and well-being worldwide. The Smallholder Farmers Alliance is helping to heal Haiti's scarred landscape, improve lives, protect the planet, and has the potential to enhance the lives and well-being of millions of people around the world. Join us now as we journey to Haiti and learn about this innovative concept, which is creating a legacy of hope and well-being for our environment and all of us who are integral to it.
What the last year has shown us is how fragile our very existence is, how the foundations of our food supply are fractured, putting the basic needs of our survival at risk. The impact of industrial-scale agriculture on the environment is well known, but less so the impact on smallholder farmers and their communities throughout the developing world. These farmers, their families, and workers make up 1/3 of Earth's population, including many of the poorest and most vulnerable. But it turns out they could hold the key to the future of food security. A revolutionary new model developed in Haiti shows how smallholders around the world can be mobilized to grow significantly more food and at the same time improve rural economies, combat climate change, and elevate the status of women. Smallholder farmers may, in fact, hold the key to feeding the world. When you look at the history of Haiti, you realize that this little country was in the crosshairs of global power struggles. You take the example of rice. Up until the mid-1980s, Haiti was almost completely self-sufficient in growing all its own food, including rice, which is a very big part of the Haitian diet. The first step was to reduce the import tariff on rice to 15%. And then in 1994, that was reduced again to 3%. So it meant that rice grown in the United States, for example, which is subsidized by US taxpayers, could come into Haiti with only a 3% import tax and be less expensive than locally grown rice. The net result of that is that today, Haiti imports 82% of all the rice it consumes. And it's very hard to reconcile this, but it gets back to Haiti being in the midst of this global struggle for power, dominance, and economic advantage. And it puts Haiti at a disadvantage, and it puts smallholder farmers in Haiti at a severe disadvantage. When you look at Haiti, most people would not know that it was once the richest place on earth. And that's not an anecdotal reference. It generated more income per square mile than any other place in the world when it was under the colonial auspices of the French. And that was a slave economy, no question about that. But it went from being the richest place on earth to its current circumstances, largely due to external influences. For example, when it became the first successful and only successful slave revolt to result in a new country, then many countries around the world isolated it, including the United States. France claimed to own the people. They said that the revolution robbed them of that property, and so the Haitian people had to pay for themselves. In order to do that, they had to take out large loans. The last interest payment was made in 1949. So you had this long period of over a century when, one of the most egregious acts of racism undermined the ability of a country to establish an independent economy.
So when Haiti has to pay for its freedom to French government, there was not enough money to pay. So they cut down the trees and brought them to the metropole, which is French at that time. So that's one of the starting point of deforestation in the countries.
One of the great challenges in Haiti, over 80% of the national energy grid is based on charcoal and trees. There is no national solution. The only thing that we can do as the Smallholder Farmers Alliance is to change the culture.
Alors, tout autant que le pays Haïti pas reboisé, ou pas un environnement qui est en santé, ou pas aucun projet de développement durable non plus. Parce qu'on a fait un bel pont là, et puis on a tête monde qui dégrade à côté pour envoyer de l'eau, venir descendre, et puis pour un pont en moins que 10 minutes. Donc on investit $1 million US et pour perdre dans 10 minutes. Vaut mieux qu'on résoudre le problème qui cause ça.
Nous voulons l'autre Haïti, l'autre pays. Si nous avons pris tant de changements pour demain. Un changement qui va venir pour aujourd'hui avec demain, mais un changement durable.
Timote and I met in 2009, and we were both passionately interested in planting trees in Haiti.
My background is in agronomy. I'm agronomist by training. My inspiration comes from seeing Haitian farmers fighting with the land, trying to get food from agriculture. but not having any support from people who can help. I decided to help on that way and get to school and be able to help farmers in Haiti.
I was very inspired by Richard St. Barbe Baker, and he became my mentor. And he was a great forester and conservationist. The work that I did learning under St. Barbe Baker's direction is that you have to figure out a way to incorporate any kind of development activity, in this case tree planting, so that it becomes part of the culture of any given region or country, because otherwise it can't live after you've moved on. I could never do what Timote does to have garnered the support and respect and recognition by farmers in terms of how they see him as a natural leader. And conversely, informed by that experience, I can then help to sell the idea and raise money. That combination we both realized was a unique one that allowed us to form a collaboration, form the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, and be able to completely complement one another. From the very first day, we have never had a single disagreement about anything, because we've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, along the way. We've been able to navigate all of that successfully. We identified ourselves by our interest in trees, but we also identified ourselves in terms of our spiritual anchors. In Timote's case, his Christian faith; in my case, my Baha'i faith.
As Christians, I am really doing my best to please not only the people, but to please God. So the spiritual values are really helpful to me in this fight for development in Haiti.
We came to realize that there were common spiritual values we both drew on. If I'm responding to my own faith tradition and recognizing humanity as a whole, and that I'm connected to that whole, then I can't stand by and watch huge segments of that family suffering. And that's how Timote and I are able to draw on our respective faith traditions and do a service together. So we had to figure out how to enlist smallholder farmers to plant the trees that we wanted to contribute to help reforest Haiti. Our first approach was to say to the farmers, if we grow the trees in nurseries and give them to you, will you plant them? Because they'll be free and it'll be great for the environment. And they basically said no. They were, overwhelmed in dealing with just being farmers in a very complicated environment. So then we had to figure out, well, could we maybe pay for them to grow the trees? But our initial corporate sponsor, the Timberland Shoe Company, said that's not a very good model, because what happens when the organization stops and our sponsorship stops? Where will that leave the farmers?
Development for a sustainable world cannot be based on dependency, but on co-elevation.
So Timote and I then began meeting with smallholder farmers, and we asked them, what do you need to farm more effectively? And it came down to three things: better quality seed, better quality hand tools to work the land, and that they needed help to improve their basic agricultural operations. So we said, would you then be willing to grow trees in nurseries that we set up if, in exchange, we provided the three things you identified that you most needed? Then the farmers were very happily ready to take part. And this is where the basic concept of tree currency came from. It created a different dynamic than if we were giving them the trees for free. The farmers became independent agents.
Yo le mbis tablurian. Moi planter me fait, petit batte me fait. Et ça la saison on planter. Avec ça berigène batte là. Ça c'est pas d'été ça yo. M'dal dans pépinière alliance là. Moi même récolter joint, moi même joint me récolter li. Moi il m'a possible petit minute à manger en ici moi me vendre quelques là dernier moi me cache un bête pour me garder pour de me suivre.
Traditionally, Asian families give more chance to men than women. In our project, we want women to share the power decision equally with men.
Within the first year of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, a delegation of women farmers came to Timote and I and asked about microcredit loans, which they could use to both improve their farms as well as developing small side businesses that would supplement their farm income. Not only were women almost exclusively the recipients of these loans, it's built up a tremendous body of successful women entrepreneurs.
When we initiate the microcredit program, the women were more accountable, more trustworthy than the men. Having women part of what we're doing made things easier in terms of planning, in terms of implementation, and also bring life to everything we're doing.
I met Tony several years ago in Haiti, and I had set out to meet him because I knew that he was a comic book artist. And I was intrigued with the possibility of how you can use comic books to communicate social issues.
Moi j'ai une mission. C'est planter pied bois, poter coller à petits paysans, et puis bail égalité femme ak garçon bourrat.
The comic book of Tanama is doing very well. I was able to present it to 2 schools in Port-au-Prince, and the kids loved it, and they were so happy that they can finally have a Haitian superhero. They are really aware of how tree planting is important in Haiti. Looking at young women in Haiti, their life is hard. It's very important to have a character who promotes tree planting and women empowerment, where the kids can identify themselves, especially young women, so they can feel empowered that it's not only men who can do great things.
My name is Tanama, and I am here in Haiti to plant trees. Our planet needs more trees to combat climate change, and we need to grow more food to feed a growing world population. Here in Haiti, we've come up with a way to do both at the same time, and it all starts with smallholder farmers.
One of the most interesting things that's going on at the moment in agriculture worldwide is the emergence of the regenerative movement. Whereas once organic was the gold standard for agriculture, organic certification is a series of no's. No, we're not using pesticides. No, we're not using chemicals. No, we're not using bad stuff to grow this food. Whereas in reality, what we really want is a series of yeses. Yes, we're helping the farmers. Yes, we're contributing positively to improve the environment. Yes, we're helping to encourage women's participation in agriculture. That's what regenerative represents. Regenerative agriculture is focused on smaller plot sizes. And the idea is that it's going many steps past organic to begin to identify the practices that represent a more sustainable and holistic approach to growing food. So as the regenerative movement emerges internationally, the Smallholder Farmers Alliance has a particular role, because by definition, a smallholder farmer is not growing a large plot of monoculture crop. We set out to develop an app that would allow us to track and measure the impact of an individual farm, starting with cotton, but no matter what crop they're growing. What is the effect of that one crop on the livelihood of the farmers, on the yields on those farms, the impact of that individual farm on mitigating climate change, on contributing to women's empowerment? We looked around to see if there was one already. There wasn't. And so working with Columbia University, and now more recently, a partnership with a Silicon Valley group called the Lydian Group, we've actually been able to develop an app that can tell you these things. But at the same time, the farmers themselves are selling data which becomes the equivalent of a new farm product.
And now we're standing on the cusp of creating a new type of supply chain that will measure the social and environmental impacts of agricultural products with new generation digital tools. So it's all very exciting. And if you imagine as a consumer walking into a timberland store, you know, the end game here is that as a consumer you could go and scan a hang tag, and then your phone would call up information about who grew the cotton and where. And it would not only reflect that, but it would also reflect the impact on farmers and their families. It would reflect the organic protocols used in growing the cotton, the impacts on the environment and food security, on the communities and the empowerment of women. That's a lot of information, right, to get through your phone, but you could imagine a video that could communicate that very powerfully and with a rich sort of story behind it to give consumers a taste of what's possible.
We are meeting the needs of the people, because if they are happy, that means our presence in the area is meaningful to him. I think that's all. The happiness is mine.
The advantage that's becoming clear with regard to smallholders, they almost all farm organically because that's the way it's always been. Now, there was an assumption beginning in the early 1960s that smallholder farming as a category would disappear in favor of large-scale commercial farms. And the fact that there are still 500 million smallholder farms left means that they're not going to go away. But because they've been ignored and marginalized all this time, they've lost their ability to produce as much food as they could. If they had a little bit of support, or anywhere near the kind of support that large-scale commercial agriculture has had, in terms of research and technology and trade agreements and storage capacity, we would have the potential of a really extraordinary amount of additional food being made available locally throughout the developing world. The challenge with so much dependence on large-scale commercial agriculture is the contribution that industrial agriculture makes to climate change. It's one of the major sources of CO2 in the atmosphere. Ultimately, when the systems begin to break down because it's become completely dependent on the use of chemicals to make it function, then you're left with barren land that can no longer be productive. But if you create a stronger rural community where farming is once again more productive and it's a better source of livelihood and people see it as a better way to live, then we've got a chance to be able to enlist such a huge segment of the global population in a more successful, sustainable, and holistic way of growing our food. At one level, you can look at food insecurity as a political process that is based on power and money. But I frame it a little differently. I think that it is a consequence of not understanding that we are one interdependent human family. When every action that's taken to consolidate power, prevent others from having a share of what you have, that destabilizes the entire thing. We have to find ways for people to embrace that larger vision, because ultimately the success of that complete, diverse family is going to be what helps to save you as an individual in your own family.
This is an example that says reforestation is possible.
Yes.
Because we have in here less than 500 millimeters of rain per year.
Yeah.
And the trees survive.
And it went from nothing to this.
Exactly.
Et puis ça, elle a une belle, il y a une verte, il y a une belle. Il dans 10 ans là, c'est où voir. Oui, c'est où voir pour savoir quand on y est parce que dans 10 ans là, nous faisons noir belle là, la belle.
Et si on a venu vous couper?
Non, non, pas mon couper.
What I've come to discover, as has Timote, is that if you have not planned your exit strategy, then you are part of the ongoing problem. And so our long-term goal for the Smallholder Farmers Alliance is that it becomes a movement that we lose all control of, because that's the only scale at which you can affect real change. So let's at least take a step to figure out how to support smallholder farming as a new frontier that can simultaneously help to grow more food while, as we've shown, support gender equality and climate change mitigation. Why not take the chance? Because it represents possibly our best chance of overcoming these global challenges.
The Smallholder Farmers Alliance is a pioneer in maximizing the productivity of one of the world's most valuable and underappreciated resource, that of smallholder farmers, who make up 1/3 of the world's population. This initiative is creating a powerful legacy which holds an important key to the world's food security. The International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation is lifting up the important work of these frontline innovators who have committed much of their lives to making this world a better place for all of us and showing us new models and alternative ways of living, working, and being together. Our deepest appreciation to Hugh, Locke, and Timote Georges, co-founders of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, all of the smallholder farmers, and the many people that have helped to make this powerful story from Haiti a success. May this new methodology that has the potential to not only feed the world, but to feed our future, be replicated in as many countries as possible as we look to smallholder farmers who hold the key to our food security and the regeneration of our environment. Thank you for joining us today. It's nice to know that we are live, but thank you so much, Ben. And we're very fortunate to be able to have Hugh Locke and Timote Georges with us after seeing this beautiful film. And Hugh Locke is the president and co-founder of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance and a member of the International Advisory Council of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. And he is the author of the Haiti Experiment and writes and lectures extensively on smallholder farming and sustainable development. And Hugh is also founder and president of the Impact Farming Foundation, which is using a social business approach to transform smallholder farmers into a global force to combat climate change, improve food security, and empower women. Now, Timote Georges is executive director and co-founder of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. He is an agronomist who studied natural resources and peace at the United Nations mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica and climate change at Gulf University. He is co-author of The Fabric of Community, and in 2002, he joined the Haiti presidential program called Alpha Economic, a literacy program that aims at alleviating socioeconomic deprivation in the rural areas of Gonals. His focus is on environmental rehabilitation, natural resource management, and development capacity building at the community level. And Hugh and Timote, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know, Timote, you're calling in from Haiti, and for your cooperation for making this film possible. And Hugh, I wanted to ask you a question. Would you say that the Smallholder Farmers Alliance model in Haiti has the potential to be introduced in other countries?
I would say the principles do. I don't think that I would want to suggest the Smallholder Farmers Alliance particular model needs to be the thing that's replicated, but the principles of engaging with smallholder farmers wherever they are to be able to find a way to connect tree planting or a needed environmental activity, but tree planting seems to be a pretty universal need at the moment. Linking tree planting with improved agriculture so that you connect the contribution towards climate change mitigation at a core level with increased food. And we've shown one way to do that. I'm sure that there are other ways. So to me, that's the challenge, is figuring out how do you apply that concept in any developing country with smallholder farmers.
Thank you. And Timote, what would you say is the single biggest challenge holding smallholder farmers back in Haiti?
When we respond to community calls, trying to help them, our main priority is to prepare people for the adoption or the appropriation of our work, of the work. So we want them to be able to take over after a couple of examples and trainings. And that used to be the main problems for the past decades of Haiti. There have been a lot of efforts, but not a lot of results. And that's because the support is provided to the people while they keep them on dependency. So SFA came with a different approach in which from day one, we engage people in the decision and all the steps of what we're doing so that they can be the owner of the work. So right now, we are tackling this issue. It seems to be the hardest part of our challenge and this work in Haiti, but we're close to solve this because we realize that we can achieve that on a step-by-step transition.
Thank you. There's a request in the chat box from someone who would like to have explained again the three things which the farmers requested in order for them to start planting trees. So Hugh, could you go over those three things that the farmers requested that came from them?
Well, I think I should defer to Timote because they asked the questions in Creole, and although he translated them for me, I think you'd have a more direct source. So Timote, seed, tools, and training. Why do they want those?
I think these are the main inputs they need in order to produce. Most of the time, farmers in Haiti, in order to purchase these agricultural tools, they need to sell their little goods in order to have money to purchase. So if you solve this problem, you provide these tools to them, that's a lot for them. They are already able to start planting and cropping their land. So we include that in our program, and we do lend them the seeds, best quality seeds, and also agricultural hand tools. So that's a lot for them.
But I think also, to add to what Timote said, when you're a smallholder farmer and you don't have a very good yield in one season, that means you don't have the cash on hand to buy the better seed that would give you a better yield. So you get into a kind of cycle where you've got lower yields and lower profits. And to break that cycle is what we found a way to do. So the farmers in our program tend to have an average increase of around 40% in their overall farm productivity and yield. And that, because they're earning their inputs, seed, tools, and training, combined with additional yields, means that they have an average increase of income of between 50 to 100%, depending on where they are. So that ability to kind of earn your way out of extreme poverty is an important thing based on those three things. But I should also add that shortly after we got going and we were providing the seed, tools, and training in exchange for tree planting, the farmers began to realize that there was something to this tree currency business. And they started saying, what about microcredit loans? And we really could use some livestock, and then adult literacy training, and improving irrigation. So we now have, instead of just the 3 services, we have about 12. But all of them, as Timote mentioned, are implemented by farmers themselves with a minimum of oversight from us, so that when we step back, they have the capacity to carry on their own, which is a very important element, which is not present in many development activities that you see around Haiti or other developing countries.
Well, I think that is a very important principle that you both are actually modeling, and that is, and not creating a dependency, but allowing people to become self-empowered so that they can be self-sustaining. So thank you so much for sharing that highest form of love, really. And Timote, I've heard you use the term agroforestry to describe your work in Haiti. And could you explain the difference between agriculture, forestry, and agroforestry?
Yes, I would say that agriculture is the science of farming. That includes cultivation of the soil for the growing of crops and the rearing of animals to provide food, wool, and other products. And forestry itself is the science of planting, managing, and caring for forests. So agroforestry, in this regard, is the intentional combination of agriculture and forestry for a productive and a sustainable type of land use management. There are three main types of agroforestry systems. Depends on the elements that are present on the space, because agroforestry allows you to manage several elements on the same piece of land. When you combine crops and trees, this system named agri-silviculture. For example, alley cropping, home gardens. These are some examples of agri-silviculture. However, if you combine forestry, grazing of domesticated animals on pasture, this will give you a silvopastoral system where you have a really symbiotic relationship between the trees and the animals that are using the pastures. So that's this type of system that we also established in Haiti. For example, when we have the trees going up for a couple of years, and after farmers can come with the goats, and the goats will not disturb the trees because they are mature enough. So that is a typical silvopastoral system. So the third one has three elements, which are trees, crops, and animals. And this called agro-silvopastoral system. So if, for example, in your home gardens, or let's say on a given piece of land, you are cropping, and at the same time, you have scattered trees, maybe some fruit trees, and you have some goats or other type of animal attached in the nearby area. So you feed them with some forage from this piece of land. So you manage these three elements: crops, trees, and animals. So which is a type of agroforestry system that our farmers in Haiti really like. And I would say that we realize agroforestry is the most appropriate technology to smallholder farming. When you think about smallholder farmers, like people who don't have a lot of land, maybe less than 2 acres of land. So this technology is the one that really helps people to make a lot of profit of this small piece of land without abusing the natural base resource, which is the land.
Thank you so much for that answer, Timote. And there is a viewer who is very interested in learning more about the role of women and in the whole concept that you have created with the Smallholder Farmers Alliance and ensuring that women are equal partners in the project. And can you share more how this is helping to break the cycles of that have historically plagued Haiti and smallholder farmers all around the world? So Hugh, you want to respond to that? The role of women.
Role of women. When we started, Timote and I, and we were going around and meeting all kinds of farmers around Haiti, it became clear to me, because I was new to this, Timote already understood it better than me, that it's usually husband and wife who are farming together, because smallholders don't have the luxury of hiring outside people. So it's a family operation. But there is a tradition in Haiti that when it comes to, for example, farming associations or any kind of support system that's available for smallholders, it's the man who represents the family. So when we started, we made a decision, Timote and I, that husband and wife, when they farm together, would be equal but separate members of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. And this represented one of the first times that it had ever been attempted in Haiti. And actually was surprising, nobody objected. You know, we expected there to be some blowback, but it worked. Then we had a delegation of women farmers who approached us and said, you know, we could really use some small loans so that we could create side businesses to supplement our farm income. And so we looked around, we tried to figure out, was there another microcredit program that we could just adopt? And we realized that there wasn't because they were too expensive for farmers. So Timote and I just looked at each other and said, we can make a bank. Why not? And so we designed our own program. And now we have 3 different branches of the microcredit program within the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. And it's one of our most successful operations because we provide loans of the equivalent of US $50 to $550 to women farmers, and then they pay it back with about, depends on the location, but around 5% interest over a period of 6 months. And it's managed by women farmers themselves. We have 2 staff people that we have who are men, because part of the reality is when you're traveling around rural Haiti, you have to be careful about women being on their own. But in terms of the actual implementation at the community level, it's the women who manage the operation. They make sure that all the loans get repaid, or are any of the women having a problem? Do they need some input with regard to business training? So all of that combined makes a program that we started in 2011, and which to date, we don't have a single example of defaulting on a loan, because the women take this very seriously. And the other successful indicator is that many have graduated from the program and said, it was great that we got the loans, we no longer need them because our businesses are now successful enough. And to me, that's a real mark of success. And then finally, we have a basic rule that any committee, any activity at the local level within the Smallholder Farmers Alliance has to have an equal number of men and women participating, or it's not valid. And that's just become part of the culture now of the Smallholder Farmers Alliance. So we don't have to oversee it particularly, we'd look out for it, but it's just become integral to the whole operation, and people take it as normal. And I think, you know, again, that's the real mark of success for something like women's empowerment. It needs to be accepted within the culture and maintained and protected. So that's how we approach it.
Thank you so much. And, you know, there is comments being generated by someone in the audience with respect to the use of animals. So can you please clarify? He indicates that that it seems he's discouraged that, you know, funding and exploitation of animals may be part of the program. So I know there was a mention about, you know, being able to buy animals. So can you give further explanation on that?
Well, it is part of our farming operation. And so we try and set it up so that the animals are well looked after. There's a lot of use of cows for dairy, and including goats. And you have to remember that in a country like Haiti, animals are not viewed as much as a commodity as they are a bank account. So that when a farmer has a cow, then that means that they've got a sort of a resource that they can draw on. But they, we don't see it as exploitative. Yes, they are also sold for consumption. But the emphasis that we have is that we try and provide animals as part of the farm ecosystem, and balance it out that way. So we provide a veterinary service on a regular basis in any community where we have provided cows or goats. But that's our reality and our choice. I know that's not going to please everybody.
Yes, go ahead, Timote.
At some point, we ourselves discourage people to exploit animals when some farmers use cows to prepare the land. So they make it like traction, and the cows are in front of the machine to prepare the land. So we purchase a four-wheel drive tractor as a way to give service to the farmers and then stop using the cows for that purpose. So as Hugh mentioned, we see animals as part of the ecosystem, and we manage them as a living being, but not as something to exploit.
Thank you so much. We have committed to an hour for this program, and so we want to honor our agreement. And so if we could have some closing thoughts and comments that you would like to leave with the viewers from you, Timote, and then we'll go to Hugh. So Timote, concluding thoughts.
Thank you for this very important gathering, and thank you to the audience. We have a lot of challenges. Some of them are local and others are global. Some happen locally and have an impact everywhere. So that means they don't respect countries, borders, skin colors. So we need to get unified to form synergy behind good policies and to tackle these issues. So there's a saying in Haiti that people always say, one cannot carry one cannot do the workload, but together we can. So that's what we need today to face all these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timote. And Hugh, your concluding thoughts, please.
Working with smallholder farmers in Haiti, which was my first experience in that regard, really opened my eyes to the global situation of smallholder farmers. And has been mentioned several times, they represent a third of humanity, but it's the most underperforming segment of the global economy. And so I think that we need to be rigorous in looking at the situation in very clear and informed terms to be able to figure out some solutions. And I'll leave you with one statistic, because people say, well, smallholder farmers, they're not really relevant. Well, one of the reasons that they're not relevant is because so much of the support has gone to industrial farming. And one example of that is the current situation with regard to farm subsidies in rich countries. So I'll leave you with these two figures. Right now, the wealthier countries provide development assistance, foreign aid, at the level of approximately $165 billion a year to the less developed countries. Now, the same wealthy countries subsidize their agriculture at the level of $700 billion. So they're giving away $165 billion a year to developing countries. They're using taxpayer money as well to subsidize their own farms at the level of $700 billion. And much of the produce is being sold to the developing countries that could have the capacity to grow their own food if given the support to smallholder farmers. So when you look at it in those terms, there's some pretty large scale changes that need to be made in order to create a landscape in which smallholder farmers can begin to hold their own within the global economy. And ours is just one example of how that might be done, but at least it works and we're doing it. And thank you, Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, the sustainable agricultural technologies and innovative approaches developed by the Smallholder Farmers Alliance in Haiti really have the potential to significantly increase food security in developing countries by utilizing a largely untapped resource, and that is the smallholder farmers, who have been tremendously underappreciated. And we do thank Hugh and Timote for your many years of hard work and commitment that you have made in Haiti, and the ray of hope and optimism that your works will present to other communities worldwide. Thank you both for joining me today, and we have been enriched by your innovative and pioneering ideas. And may your work be replicated around the world with smallholder farmers who really hold the key to our food security and environmental regeneration when you consider they represent 1/3 of the world's population. Thank you, everyone, and I bid you all good wishes until we meet again. Thank you. Bye-bye.